In the early hours of January 14th, 2025, 188 Ukrainian drones crossed simultaneously into the airspace of 7 Russian regions, and by the time the first civil defense sirens sounded over Saratov, Engels, Bryansk, Kursk, Oryol, Tula, and Nizhny Novgorod, it was already too late to intercept the entire wave. What Ukraine executed that night was not a conventional strike. It was the most ambitious demonstration of asymmetric warfare since the invasion began in February of 2022. The number deserves a moment of attention. 188 unmanned aerial vehicles operating simultaneously across a territorial span covering more than 750 miles in width, the equivalent distance of a commercial flight between Lisbon and Berlin. To frame the operational scale, each of those drones cost between $20,000 and $50,000, meaning the entire operation was launched for a fraction of the cost of a single Russian-caliber cruise missile, valued at approximately $6.5 million per unit. Ukraine had found the equation every military commander searches for and rarely discovers, inflicting disproportionate strategic damage at a cost the adversary cannot replicate in the opposite direction. And here was the paradox the Kremlin's planners had failed to calculate. Russia was spending, according to estimates from the Royal United Services Institute in London, approximately $870 million per month exclusively on air defense over its own territory, surface-to-air missiles, maintenance of S-300 and S-400 systems, fuel for interceptor jets, radar operator salaries. Ukraine, by contrast, was spending a fraction of that figure to saturate those same defenses with swarms of cheap drones. Every drone shot down represented a simultaneous tactical victory for Russia and a strategic economic defeat. The weapon the Kremlin fired to defend itself cost between 10 and 20 times more than the target it was trying to destroy. The paradox had closed in on itself. But there was a layer we had not yet touched, and it changes the nature of this analysis entirely. The targets chosen for that night were not random. At least 17 drones converged on Engels 2 airbase in the Saratov Oblast, the complex that houses the Tu-160 strategic bombers, known by their NATO designation as the Blackjack, the aircraft responsible for launching cruise missiles against Ukrainian energy infrastructure. Striking Engels 2 was not hitting some ordinary depot. It was driving a finger into the most sensitive wound of Russia's strategic arsenal, the platforms that carry nuclear warheads in times of deterrence and conventional missiles in times of war. The equation had changed. Step back and look at the full picture. Since the autumn of 2022, when Ukraine began operating its first long-range drones adapted from commercial designs, the growth of Ukrainian offensive capability followed a curve that analysts at the Institute for the Study of War, the ISW, described as exponential. In October of 2022, strikes on Russian territory involved between 5 and 15 drones per operation, with range limited to 185 miles from the border. By January of 2024, that figure had jumped to 50 to 80 drones per wave, with range extended to more than 600 miles, hitting refineries in Bashkortostan and military depots beyond the Urals. 12 months later, 188 drones in a single night. The progression revealed not only an increase in industrial capacity, but an entirely new operational doctrine developed at a speed that Russian military intelligence could not match. And here was the figure that conventional reporting was not displaying with the frequency it deserved. According to a Reuters survey cross-referenced with satellite imagery from Maxar Technologies, Ukrainian drone strikes against Russian refineries throughout 2024 and the early months of 2025 reduced Russia's oil refining capacity by approximately 14%, a number that appears modest until one understands what it means in practice. Russia was refining roughly 5,800,000 barrels of oil per day before the escalation of attacks. A 14% reduction translated to more than 800,000 barrels per day removed from the Russian domestic market, fuel that never reached filling stations, diesel that never fed the army's logistics trucks, aviation kerosene that never filled the jets, and every unrefined barrel represented lost revenue. Because Russia exports refined products at a significantly higher profit margin than crude oil. Estimates from the Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air, CREA, based in Helsinki, indicated that cumulative losses in refined product export revenue exceeded $2 billion in the second half of 2024 alone. The plan had failed, not because the enemy was stronger, but because the enemy had anticipated every vulnerability before the first defense could be reorganized. Consider what that number represents in practical terms. $2 billion is approximately what Russia was spending every 40 days to sustain ground operations in Ukraine, according to calculations from the British Ministry of Defence released in its periodic intelligence reports. Ukraine, with drones costing a fraction of 1% of that figure, was eroding the financial machine that fueled the very war being waged against it. And the greatest paradox of the entire crisis lay precisely here. The weapon the regime had deployed to wound the enemy, a prolonged war of attrition, was at that moment being turned against its own revenue stream by swarms of devices that fit in the bed of a pickup truck. In the shadow of this monumental strategic miscalculation, one actor was watching it all with calculated satisfaction. And here was the actor that headlines were not mentioning with the frequency the data deserved: China. Beijing had become the single largest buyer of Russian crude oil since the start of the war, negotiating discounts reaching $35 per barrel below the Brent benchmark, the equivalent of an involuntary subsidy that Russia was paying out of sheer desperation for cash flow. Every Ukrainian refinery Russia destroyed with Caliber missiles, and every Russian refinery Ukraine struck with cheap drones, pushed Moscow a little further into the Chinese commercial trap. In 2024, China imported approximately 108 million tons of Russian oil, an increase of 14% over the previous year, at prices that analysts at JP Morgan classified as predatory. Russia was selling greater volume and earning less per barrel. The dependence was growing, the leverage was accumulating, and leverage has no expiration date. The historical analogy that captures this dynamic with the most precision is not the most obvious one, not Pearl Harbor, the surprise attack that triggered a devastating retaliation. It is the Allied strategic bombing campaign against Nazi Germany's synthetic oil refineries between May and September of 1944. In that offensive, B-17 and Lancaster heavy bombers did not attempt to destroy the Wehrmacht on the battlefield. They struck the fuel source that kept it moving. Within 4 months, German aviation fuel production had collapsed by 87%, and the Luftwaffe ceased to function as a coherent air force, not for lack of pilots or aircraft, but for lack of fuel to take off. Ukraine in 2025 was replicating this logic with one fundamental difference. Where the Allies employed thousands of crew members aboard bombers that cost the inflation-adjusted equivalent of $25 million each, Ukraine was using autonomous drones built in improvised workshops, each one costing less than a family sedan. But the true impact of this operation extended far beyond the numbers on the battlefield. There was a man whose name appeared repeatedly in Western intelligence reports as a barometer of the Kremlin's institutional desperation. General Sergei Surovikin, known internally as General Armageddon, who had commanded Russian forces in Syria with brutal efficiency and 2 defining traits: a reputation for resolving crises with disproportionate force, and a track record of never flinching in the face of politically uncomfortable orders. Surovikin had been removed from command following the Wagner Group mutiny in June of 2023, and his disappearance from public view symbolized precisely the kind of institutional crisis that Ukrainian drones were accelerating. This general is not the emotional protagonist of this analysis. He is the reference point for understanding what Russia's power structure consumes when it needs scapegoats to justify failures that are structural, not individual. And then we arrive at the question no analyst was answering with sufficient clarity. Russia's air defense system, the integrated network that was supposed to be the densest and most sophisticated in the world, was failing not due to technical incompetence, but due to an arithmetic impossibility. According to British Ministry of Defence estimates, Russia possessed approximately 560 medium and long-range air defense systems distributed across a territory exceeding 6.5 million square miles, the largest country on the planet by land area. providing adequate air defense coverage for every refinery, every airbase, every ammunition depot, and every logistics node would require, according to RUSI calculations, at least 3,000 additional systems, a quantity that Russia's defense industry, operating under Western sanctions restricting access to semiconductors and precision components, would need between 8 and 12 years to produce. The era of cheap and feared attacks had been closed forever. The era of cheap, intelligent, and lethal defense had officially begun. And here was what that layer revealed about the desperation that this analysis has been building toward. When satellite imagery from the day after the 188 drone attack confirmed damage at no fewer than 3 energy installations and 1 strategic airbase, the Kremlin's response followed a pattern that analysts at Chatham House in London had already identified as an indicator of institutional panic, disproportionate retaliation against Ukrainian civilian targets. Within 72 hours of the drone strike, Russia launched 46 ballistic and cruise missiles against Ukrainian cities, hitting hospitals, power stations, and residential areas. The cost of those 46 missiles, according to estimates from the Defense Express portal in Kyiv, exceeded $300 million, 150 times the estimated cost of the entire Ukrainian drone operation that had provoked them. Every additional day was one more day of pressure on Russia's industrial capacity to replenish its precision missile stockpiles. Pressure that would create, for the General Staff, a weight it could not indefinitely ignore. Look at what this reveals about the conflict's dynamics in their totality. Russia was trapped in a cost spiral in which every cycle of retaliation against Ukraine consumed precision munitions that took months to replenish, while Ukraine reconstituted its drone strike capability within weeks. According to Estonian intelligence reports published in February of 2025, Russia's production capacity for Caliber and Kh-101 cruise missiles had been reduced to approximately 40 units per month, against an average consumption of 60 to 80 units monthly during periods of intensified bombardment. The math did not close. And when the arithmetic of a war of attrition fails to close, the side that bleeds more slowly wins. Russia cannot sustain this hemorrhage indefinitely, and the end of that period will determine the future, not of one country, but of the entire European continent. What that night of 188 drones established was not merely an operational record, it was a new paradigm of asymmetric warfare in which the poorer attacker can impose on the wealthier defender a protection cost that is mathematically unsustainable. And the strategic question that now demands an answer is direct. How long can Russia's war economy, sustained by oil sold at a discount to China and by missile stockpiles shrinking faster than production can replenish them, simultaneously maintain the ground offensive in Ukraine and the air defense of a territory spanning 11 time zones before arithmetic, rather than diplomacy, decides the outcome? If this analysis has revealed a layer you had not yet considered, subscribe and turn on the bell, because the next chapter of this impossible equation is already being written across the skies of Russia, and the numbers keep moving. The next night had already begun.